Chapter 15 of 17. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Jonathan Burchard, May 2009. 17 by Booth Tarkington. Chapter 15. Romance of Statistics. On a warm morning, 10 days later, William stood pensively among his mother's flower beds behind the house, his attitude denoting a low state of vitality. Not far away, an aged negro sat upon a wheelbarrow in the hot sun, tremulously yet skillfully whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a boat, labor more to his taste, evidently, than that which he had abandoned at the request of Jane. Allusion to this preference for a lighter task was made by Genesis, who was erecting a trellis on the border of the little garden.
"Pappy whittle all day," he chuckled. "Whittle all night, too. Pappy, I thought you was goin' to get 'at long bed all spade up for me by noon. Ain't 'at what you told me?"
"You let him alone, Genesis," said Jane, who sat by the old man's side, deeply fascinated. "There's going to be a great deal of rain in the next few days, maybe, and I have to have this boat ready." The aged darky lifted his streaky and diminished eyes to the burnished sky, and laughed.
"Rain come some day, anyways," he said. "We get de boat ready 'fore she fall, dat's sho." His glance wandered to William, and rested upon him with feeble curiosity. "Dat ain't yo' pappy, is it?" he asked Jane.
"I should say it isn't!" she exclaimed. "It's Willie. He was only 17 about 2 or 3 months ago, Mr. Genesis." This was not the old man's name, but Jane had evolved it, inspired by respect for one so aged and so kind about whittling. He was the father of Genesis, and the latter, neither to her knowledge nor to her imagination, possessed a surname.
"I got cataract in my lef' eye," said Mr. Genesis, "an' de right one, she kind o' tricksy, too. Tell black man from white man, little from big."
"I'd hate it if he was papa," said Jane confidentially. "He's always cross about somep'm, because he's in love." She approached her mouth to her whittling friend's ear and continued in a whisper. "He's in love of Miss Pratt. She's out walkin' with Joe Bullitt. I was in the front yard with Willie, and we saw him go by. He's mad." William did not hear her. Moodily, he had discovered that there was something amiss with the buckle of his belt, and having ungirded himself, he was biting the metal tongue of the buckle in order to straighten it. This fell under the observation of Genesis, who remonstrated.
"You break yo' teef on 'at buckle," he said.
"No, I won't either," William returned crossly.
"Ain't my teef," said Genesis. "Break 'em if you want to."
The attention of Mr. Genesis did not seem to be attracted to the speakers. He continued his whittling in a craftsmanlike manner, which brought praise from Jane. "You can see to whittle, Mr. Genesis," she said. "You whittle better than anybody in the world."
"I spect so, mebbe," Mr. Genesis returned, with a little complacency. "How old yo' pappy?"
"Oh, he's old," Jane explained. William deigned to correct her. "He's not old, he's middle-aged."
"Well, suh," said Mr. Genesis, "I had 3 chillum 'fo' I 'uz 20. I had 2 when I 'uz 18."
William showed sudden interest. "You did?" he exclaimed. "How old were you when you had the first one?"
"I 'uz jes' yo' age," said the old man. "I 'uz 17."
"By George!" cried William. Jane seemed less impressed than William, 17 being a long way from 10, though of course to 17 itself hardly any information could be imagined as more interesting than that conveyed by the words of the aged Mr. Genesis. The impression made upon William was obviously profound and favorable. "By George!" he cried again.
"Genesis, he de youngest one," said the old man. "Genesis, he 'uz bawn when I 'uz 61."
William moved closer. "What became of the one that was born when you were 17?" he asked.
"Well, suh," said Mr. Genesis, "I nev' did know."
At this, Jane's interest equaled William's. Her eyes consented to leave the busy hands of the aged darky, and, much enlarged, rose to his face. After a little pause of awe and sympathy, she inquired, "Was it a boy or a girl?" The old man deliberated within himself.
"Seems like it must be a boy."
"Did it die?" Jane asked softly.
"I reckon it must be dead by now," he returned musingly. "Good many of 'em dead. What I knows is dead. Yes'm, I reckon so."
"How old were you when you were married?" William asked, with a manner of peculiar earnestness. It was the manner of one who addresses a colleague.
Me? Well, sir, dat 'pends." He seemed to search his memory. "I ricollect I 'az married once in Louisville," he said. Jane's interest still followed the first child. "Was that where it was born, Mr. Genesis?" she asked. He looked puzzled, and paused in his whittling to rub his deeply corrugated forehead. "Well, suh, mus' been some born in Louisville. Genesis," he called to his industrious son, "why is you born?" "Right in this town," laughed Genesis. "You forget a good deal, pappy, but I notice you don't forget come to meals." The old man grunted, resuming his whittling busily. "Ain't much use," he complained. "Can't eat nuff'm 'less it is all gruelly. Man can't eat nuff'm 'less'n he got teef. Genesis, didn't I hear you tellin' dis white gemmun take care his teef, not bite on no iron?" William smiled in pity. "I don't need to bother about that, I guess," he said. "I can crack nuts with my teeth." "Yes, suh," said the old man. "You kin now. Every nut you crack now goin' cost you a yell when you git 'long about 40 and 50. You crack nuts now and you holler den." "Well, I guess I won't worry myself much now about what won't happen till I'm 40 or 50," said William. "My teeth'll last my time, I guess." That brought a chuckle from Genesis. "Just listen," he exclaimed. "Young man think he nev' goin' be ole man. Else he think, dat ole man what I'm goin' to be, dat ain't goin' be me 'tall. Dat goin' be somebody else. What I care about dat ole man? I ain't goin' take care o' no teef for him. Yes, suh, an' den when he git to be ole man, he say, 'What become o' dat young man I used to be? Where is dat young man a gone to? He is a fool, dat's what, an' I ain't no fool, so he mus' be somebody else, not me. But I do jes' wish I had him here about 2 minutes, long enough to lam him for not takin' care o' my teef for me. Yes, suh." William laughed. His good humor was restored, and he found the conversation of Mr. Genesis attractive. He seated himself upon an upturned bucket near the wheelbarrow, and reverted to a former theme. "Well, I have heard of people getting married even younger than you were," he said. "You take India, for instance. Why, they get married in India when they're 12, and even 7 and 8 years old." "They do not," said Jane promptly. "Their mothers and fathers wouldn't let 'em, and they wouldn't want to anyway." "I s'pose you been to India and know all about it," William retorted. "For the matter o' that, there was a young couple got married in Pennsylvania the other day. The girl was only 15 and the man was 16. It was in the papers, and their parents consented, and said it was a good thing. Then there was a case in Fall River, Massachusetts, where a young man 18 years old married a woman 41 years old. It was in the papers, too. And I heard of another case somewhere in Iowa. A boy began shavin' when he was 13 and shaved every day for 4 years, and now he's got a full beard and he's going to get married this year, before he's 18 years old. Joe Bullitt's got a cousin in Iowa that knows about this case. He knows the girl this fellow with the beard is goin' to marry, and he says he expects it'll turn out the best thing that could have happened. They're goin' to live on a farm. There's hundreds of cases like that, only you don't hear of more'n just a few of them. People used to get married at 16, 17, 18, anywhere in there, and never think anything of it at all. Right up to about 100 years ago, there were more people married at those ages than there were about 24 and 25, the way they are now. For instance, you take Shakespeare." William paused. Mr. Genesis was scraping the hull of the miniature boat with a piece of broken glass in lieu of sandpaper, but he seemed to be following his young friend's remarks with attention. William had mentioned Shakespeare impulsively, in the ardor of demonstrating his point. However, upon second thought, he decided to withdraw the name. "I mean, you take the olden times," he went on. "Hardly anybody got married after they were 19 or 20 years old, unless they were widowers, because they were all married by that time. And right here in our own county, there were 11 couples married in the last 6 months under 21 years of age. I've got a friend named Johnny Watson. His uncle works down at the courthouse and told him about it, so it can't be denied. Then there was a case I heard of over in—" Mr. Genesis uttered a loud chuckle. "My goodness!" he exclaimed. "How you c'lect all dem facts? Lan' name, what puzzlin' me is how you 'member 'em after you done c'lect 'em. Ef it is me, I couldn't c'lect 'em in de first place, an' ef I could, dey wouldn't be no use to me 'cause I couldn't ricollect 'em." "Well, it isn't so hard," said William, "if you kind of get the hang of it." Obviously pleased, he plucked a spear of grass and placed it between his teeth, adding, "I always did have a pretty good memory."
"Mamma says you're the most forgetful boy she ever heard of," said Jane calmly. "She says you can't remember anything 2 minutes." William's brow darkened. "Now look here," he began with severity, but the old darky intervened.
"Some folks got good ricollection and some folks got bad," he said pacifically. "Young white gem'um ricollect mo' in 2 minute than I kin in 2 years."
Jane appeared to accept this as settlement of the point at issue, while William bestowed upon Mr. Genesis a glance of increased favor. William's expression was pleasant to see. In fact, it was the pleasantest expression Jane had seen him wearing for several days. Almost always, lately, he was profoundly preoccupied, and so easily annoyed that there was no need to be careful of his feelings, because, as his mother observed, he was certain to break out every so often, no matter what happened. "I pretty much remember everything," he said, as if in modest explanation of the performance which had excited the aged man's admiration. "I can remember things that happened when I was 4 years old." "So can I," said Jane. "I can remember when I was 2. I had a kitten fell down the cistern and Papa said it hurt the water."
"My goodness!" Mr. Genesis exclaimed. "And you is only 2 year old, honey. Best I can do recollect is when I was about 50."
"Oh, no," Jane protested. "You said you remembered having a baby when you were 17, Mr. Genesis."
"Yes'm," he admitted. "I mean recollect good like you do about yo' li'l cat and how yo' pappy tuck on 'bout it. I can recollect some, but I can't recollect good."
William coughed with a certain importance. "Do you remember," he asked, "when you were married? How did you feel about it? Were you kind of nervous, or anything like that, beforehand?" Mr. Genesis again passed a wavering hand across his troubled brow. "I mean," said William, observing his perplexity, were you sort of shaky, for instance, as if you were taking an important step in life?"
"Lemme see."
The old man pondered for a moment.
"I felt mighty shaky once. I recollect that time yalla mulatto man shootin' at me from behind a snake fence."
"Shootin' at you!" Jane cried, stirred from her accustomed placidity. "Mr. Genesis, what did he do that for?"
"Nuffum," replied Mr. Genesis with feeling. "Nuffum in de wide worl'. He bound to shoot somebody, an' pick on me 'cause I 'uz de handiest."
He closed his knife, gave the little boat a final scrape with the broken glass, and then a soothing rub with the palm of his hand.
"Dah, honey," he said,
and simultaneously factory whistles began to blow.
"Dah yo' little steamboat, good as I can get her widout no biler an' no smokestack. I reckon your pappy'll buy 'em fer you."
Jane was grateful. "It's a beautiful boat, Mr. Genesis. I do thank you." Genesis, the son, laid aside his tools and approached.
"Pappy finish whittlin' spang on dem noon whistles," he chuckled. "Come 'long, Pappy. I bet you walk fast 'nuff goin' todes dinner. I hear fry cakes ploppin' in skillet."
Mr. Genesis laughed loudly, his son's words evidently painting a merry and alluring picture, and the two, followed by Clematis, moved away in the direction of the alley gate. William and Jane watched the brisk departure of the antique with sincere esteem and liking. "He must have been 16," said William musingly. "When?" Jane asked. William, in deep thought, was still looking after Mr. Genesis. He was almost unconscious that he had spoken aloud, and he replied, automatically, "When he was married." Then, with a start, he realized into how great a condescension he had been betrayed, and hastily added, with pronounced hauteur, "Things you don't understand. You run in the house." Jane went into the house, but she did not carry her obedience to the point of running. She walked slowly, and in that state of profound reverie which was characteristic of her when she was immersed in the serious study of William's affairs. End of chapter 15.